The rabbis tell us that the proper context in which to understand the Ten Commandments is that of a wedding. The rabbis tell us that the giving of the Ten Commandments was personal, intimate, relational. An exchange of vows, a tying of the knot between God and Israel. So I invite you in your imagination to travel back in time 3,000 years to the Sinai Peninsula. The children of Israel have been delivered, have been rescued and delivered by God from wretched enslavement in Egypt. Free at last. Having entered the desert, they set up camp at the foot of Mount Sinai. God, who led them as a pillar of cloud by day and as a pillar of fire by night, is settled atop Sinai, shrouded in the mountain mists that often occur on the Sinai Peninsula. And that, say the rabbis, is when God decides to propose. God, on bended knee, says, "Remember how I brought you out of Egypt, how I bore you on eagle's wings. I brought you to myself to make you my people." God uses the language of a lover proposing to the beloved. I brought you to myself. I love you. And if you marry me, if you take my covenant and accept it, then you will be a holy nation, my treasured possession. Well, the people, as it happens, are in turn in love with God. They have fallen madly in love with this God who has freed them from slavery and escorted them safely to the desert. They don't act coy. They don't play hard to get. Flattered and in love, they accept God's proposal. Moses, who is God's best friend, becomes God's best man. He organizes the children of Israel to make all the preparations you make for a wedding. And 3 days later, when everything is ready, Moses regathers the children of Israel. They are squeaky clean and all turned out in their finest. And Moses arranges them neatly in the foot of Mount Sinai. And the rabbis tell us that the mists upon Mount Sinai were the chuppah, the sacred wedding canopy. It is beneath this canopy that to this day Jewish couples speak the ancient vows that unite them as partners. Moses stands between the partners, between the trembling children of Israel and Yahweh. All is silence. Moses clears his throat, and then he reads the tablets, the 10 words, the 10 commandments. And the rabbis tell us that this is the Brit, the wedding contract, the vows. The vows begin with God's own description of the relationship. I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt. God doesn't say, I am the creator God of heaven and earth, but I am Yahweh, your God, who brought you out of Egypt. You shall have no other gods before me. In other words, let's be honest, there are other suitors out there, other gods out to woo us, vying for our attentions, our affections, our time. There are other gods, oodles of them. Having no other gods before Yahweh means that money, sex, power, some of the biggies, can't insinuate themselves among us, within us, between us, can't bring us down, can't enable our exploitation of each other or others. Ours is a world of options and choices, many of them. It does no good to pretend there are no other suitors vying for our attentions. There are. But none of the other suitors has ever wrought an exodus. None but Yahweh has loved and liberated slaves. So it seems to me that 350 years ago, our faith ancestors were wooed by Yahweh, this astounding, wondrous God who loves and liberates slaves. God got down on bended knee and proposed to our ancestors. To Mary Norton, widow of the Reverend John Norton. To John Hull, mintmaster, and his wife Judith. To John Alden, sea captain, and his wife Elizabeth. To Theophilus Frary, town selectman, and his wife Hannah. To bookseller Hezekiah Usher and his wife Elizabeth. To James Pemberton, brewer. It says about him, brewer over by the town clock, so you knew where he was. And his wife Sarah. To William Salter, shoemaker, and his wife Mary, and a bunch of others. 350 years ago, God got down on bended knee, proposed to these, our ancestors, and they said yes. To read the story of it, to read about their lives, their labors, is to understand that the founding of this church was personal, intimate, relational. And as is true of any such union, it was a fateful, destiny-making tying of the knot with Yahweh. And as is true of any family, that story of Genesis passing down generation after generation after generation is deep in our DNA. And the thing about the vows Israel and God took over 3,000 years ago, the vows our ancestors took 350 years ago, the same vows by which you and I are bound to each other and to God. The thing about these vows is this: to be faithful to God, we have to be faithful to each other. That's the thing about the Ten Commandments. If they were all between you and God, that would be easy, or at least easier. But less than half of them are. Just the first 4. The ones about taking no other gods, not worshiping graven images, not taking God's name in vain, honoring the Sabbath day. But the last 6, more than half, are about loving and honoring and getting along with each other. The vows are about how to live together on this small, beautiful, fragile earth. The command to honor father and mother, directed not to children but to adults, reminds us that we are not self-made. We stand on the shoulders of others. And please note that this ancient theological affirmation elevates women, making them fully equal to men. The Ten Commandments are a fusion of theology and ethics, a sharp reminder that the way we attend to God informs and shapes the way we attend to each other. To put it differently, faithfulness to God leads to faithfulness to one another. Ethically speaking, the commandments restrain sin. And sin matters. Sin matters, for sin is never merely personal. It is never, despite what some sinners like to say, a solo occupation. Sin has consequences, a cascading effect which ripples out inevitably, inexorably into others' lives. The Ten Commandments, like vows between two people on the day of their marriage, they are the guardrails within which we agree to operate together. Or think of them as the boundary lines on a football field. The commandments keep us from running out of bounds, or make it clear when we have run out of bounds. When there is cause to blow the whistle, cry foul, exact penalties. The Ten Commandments are encouragement to live well, honestly, respectfully with each other. By adhering to these ancient imperatives, we both protect human community and enable it to flourish. Conversely, if we run out of bounds, if we cross the lines, if we fail to rest from our labors, if we tell a lie, if we covet that which belongs to a neighbor, the fabric of our relationship with God and each other begins to fray. Biblical scholars argue that after that first fateful tying of the knot 3,000 years ago on the Sinai Peninsula, that at important occasions subsequent, ancient Israel regathered to reaffirm and renew their vows to God. It was done ceremoniously, in public, in worship. I propose, church, we do the same today in this ancient house, at this site of revolution, in the presence of the spirits of our ancestors, our mothers and fathers on whose shoulders we stand. I submit that across 3.5 centuries of being church, undergirding the act of making a new nation and birthing democracy, enabling our ancestors to endure war, economic crises, epidemic, natural disaster, empowering and inspiring efforts for civil and human rights, beneath it all, undergirding it all for 350 years, lies the firm bedrock of those 10 commandments, a way of ordering the church's life, the life of its members and ministers, giving us structure, purpose, defining guardrails in our interpersonal relationships. Moreover, I submit that adherence to this ancient ethic is utterly, utterly countercultural to what the world would have us do. In light of the behaviors, the sneering cynicism we read about daily in the news, these 10 commandments seem antiquated, naive, the preoccupation of buffoons, dupes, and saps. The world would have us lie and cheat, exploit the weak, grab what we can, crush the feeble, grind them into the dirt as the strong walk on their backs. The world would have us eat too much, drink too much, buy too much, amass power and wealth, and give no heed or little heed to the prisoner languishing in jail, or the refugee deprived of security, or the motherless child. But that is not God's way. We hew to a God who loves and liberates slaves, who requires of us moral rectitude, decency, righteousness, justice, mercy, compassion, generosity, and kindness, not merely as the stuff of individual morality, but as the stuff of a sturdy society. Old South Church, dearly beloved, we are here still being church, 350 years on, not because we have always gotten it right. We have not. We are here 350 years on, not because we have always done right by God or by each other or by our neighbors. We have not. We are here today 350 years on because the ordering of human life as prescribed by God in the 10 Commandments is our North Star, our goal, the plumb line to which we return and by which we are forever measured. And if that renders us buffoons and dupes and saps, I say, so be it. So Old South Church, the time is here. The time has come to reaffirm our vows, those vows made to God 3,000 years ago at Mount Sinai by our great, great, great faith ancestors, and made again 350 years ago, May 12, 1669, in Charleston by our more immediate faith ancestors. Are you ready? Are you ready to affirm your vows? If so, please say, we are. We are. Warning, before we do this, these are not easy promises to keep. Many of us have failed at one or more of them. Yet here now in the presence of God and each other, in the hearing of our ancestors, let us reaffirm our commitment to this ancient, high, and holy ethic, not because it is easy, but because God requires it of us, because it is good and right and righteous, because without this ethical bedrock, we cannot be church, we cannot be community. So I invite you now to rise, young and old, new member and old-timer, visitor and pilgrim, in the sanctuary or by home, visiting us by home. Rise as you are able, in body or in spirit. Old South Church in Boston, will you have Yahweh, a God who loves and liberates slaves, to be your God, to live together, forsaking all others, and be faithful to God alone? If so, say, I do. Do you promise to refrain from taking the name of this God in vain? If so, say, I do. Do you promise to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, to rest from your labors? If so, say, I do. Do you promise to honor your fathers and your mothers, remembering that we stand on the shoulders of others? If so, say, I do. Do you promise not to commit murder and thereby assert that every human life is made in the image of God and that we have no right to deprive another of life? If so, say, I do. Do you promise not to commit adultery? If so, say, I do. Do you promise never to steal? And please know this, that original commandment in ancient times, including the stealing of another human being. Do you promise never to steal? If so, say, I do. Do you promise not to bear false witness against a neighbor, to honor the truth, to refrain from all lying, all deception and falsehood? If so, say, I do. Do you promise not to covet anything of your neighbors? And do you promise to refrain from jealousy, envy, and greed? If so, say, I do. Furthermore, on this auspicious anniversary and occasion, will you endeavor to love and serve the future into which God is ever calling us with more devotion than you love and cherish the noble past that is our inheritance? If so, say, we do. Do you promise to honor the God who loves and liberates the enslaved by affirming human liberation wherever and whenever it is compromised? If so, say, we promise. Do you promise to trust the God of rainbow and fiery pillar to guide Old South Church into the next 350 years? If so, say, we promise. Then may God bless us. May God strengthen us, inspire and guide us, and ever help us to keep these vows and promises we have made and renewed this day. Vows and promises which we have on this day in this house, in the presence of the Spirit of our ancestors, heartily and boisterously renewed. If so, say, Amen.